In 1450, Sultan Murad II led 100,000 Ottoman warriors to crush a rebellion in Albania. His opponent commanded just 8,000 men. The Sultan's army outnumbered the rebels 12-1, yet 4 months later, it was the Sultan who retreated in humiliation, leaving thousands dead. One man turned the Ottoman Empire's own training against them for 25 years. The fate of Christian Europe hung on a single Albanian fortress. By the end of this video, you'll understand how a trusted Ottoman commander became the empire's worst nightmare, how medieval guerrilla warfare humiliated 2 sultans, and why a forged letter changed European history. You'll discover the midnight massacre that started a quarter-century war, the battle where 5,000 Albanians annihilated an army 20 times their size, why the conqueror of Constantinople failed 3 times to take a single mountain fortress. How could a hostage become a general's worst enemy? What strategy let 1,500 defenders outlast 100,000 attackers? The answer lies in a forged letter that fooled an empire. Picture this. November 1443. An Ottoman cavalry commander rides toward an Albanian fortress with 300 men. He carries the Sultan's seal. The garrison opens the gates to their trusted general. They don't know they've just welcomed their executioner. This is Skanderbeg-born Gjergj Kastrioti, raised as Ottoman elite, trained to crush rebellions. But tonight, he becomes the rebellion. 20 years of Ottoman service end in betrayal. The Ottoman Empire's greatest humiliation wore their own uniform. To understand how one man's betrayal humiliated an empire, we must first understand the world that created him. If you're fascinated by the untold stories of history's most decisive battles, where underdogs crushed empires, hit that like button and subscribe for more epic war content. Ring the notification bell to never miss these incredible tales of military genius. Now, let me take you back to November 1443, when everything changed. The Ottoman Empire in the early 15th century was an unstoppable force. From Anatolia, the sultans had swept across the Balkans, consuming kingdoms like a wildfire consumes dry grass. Serbia fell. Bulgaria crumbled. Constantinople itself would soon follow. But between the empire and the Adriatic Sea stood a mountainous land that would become its greatest frustration: Albania. The Ottomans had a brilliant system for controlling conquered territories. They took noble children as hostages, not to kill, but to transform. These boys entered the Devshirme system, converted to Islam, and emerged as janissaries or administrators. The empire's enemies' children became its most loyal servants. Among these hostages was a 9-year-old Albanian prince named Gjergj Kastrioti. But here's what the Ottoman scouts missed. The boy came from a family of warriors. His father, Gjon Kastrioti, ruled 4 Albanian towns and had already fought the Ottomans. Young Gjergj watched his 3 older brothers taken first, never to return as Christians. When his turn came, the Ottomans saw potential in his fierce intelligence. They gave him the name Skanderbeg, Lord Alexander, after Alexander the Great. Christians would later call him Skanderbeg. For 20 years, Skanderbeg excelled in Ottoman service. He studied military tactics in the empire's finest schools. He learned siege warfare, cavalry maneuvers, and the psychology of command. The Sultan trusted him with crushing rebellions in Anatolia. He rose to become Sanjaqbey provincial governor commanding 5,000 cavalry. His fellow officers saw a loyal Ottoman commander. They couldn't see the Albanian prince still burning inside. Then Skanderbeg did something unthinkable. The powder keg was already prepared. Albanian nobles chafed under Ottoman taxation. Mountain clans that had never bowed to anyone now paid tribute to a distant sultan. The Orthodox Church faced pressure to convert. In 1443, a new rebellion sparked in Serbia. The Ottomans mobilized to crush it, and Skanderbeg received orders to march with his cavalry. The Battle of Niš would change everything. As Hungarian forces routed the Ottoman army, Skanderbeg saw his moment. But it wasn't battlefield defeat that triggered his betrayal. It was a letter from home. Albanian nobles secretly invited him to lead their resistance. 20 years of preparation crystallized into a single decision. What happened next would haunt Murad's dreams. Skanderbeg had spent 2 decades studying his masters. He knew their procedures, their documents, their seal designs. Most importantly, he knew their arrogance. The Ottomans believed their system unbreakable, that Devshirme boys became more loyal than born Turks. This confidence would be their downfall. As the Ottoman army retreated from Niš in chaos, Skanderbeg gathered 300 Albanian cavalrymen who'd served beside him for years, fellow Albanians who'd never forgotten their homeland. He found the Sultan's chancellor in the confusion. At sword point, Skanderbeg forced him to write a letter, not just any letter, a perfect forgery bearing the Sultan's seal, ordering the garrison commander at Kruja fortress to transfer command to Skanderbeg immediately. With 300 men and a piece of parchment, Skanderbeg prepared to steal the Ottoman Empire's most strategic Albanian stronghold. Kruja commanded the road from the coast to the interior, perched on a mountain spur 1,800 feet above sea level. Its garrison of Ottoman soldiers had no idea that their trusted commander had already chosen their fate. But what could make the Sultan's most trusted Albanian commander turn traitor? The answer lay in a toxic combination of memory, opportunity, and rage. 20 years hadn't erased Skanderbeg's memories of his father's submission, his brother's disappearance, his people's subjugation. Ottoman training had given him the tools. Serbian rebellion provided the moment, but it was the systematic destruction of Albanian identity that supplied the fury. This is where the story takes a blood-soaked turn. November 28, 1443, Skanderbeg's column of 300 cavalry approached Kruja at dusk. They wore Ottoman armor, flew Ottoman banners, and their commander carried documents with the Sultan's seal. The fortress garrison saw nothing unusual commanders transferred constantly during campaigns. The guards recognized Skanderbeg, the Albanian who'd proven his loyalty in countless battles. The geography of Kruja made it nearly impregnable. The fortress crowned a limestone peak with cliffs on three sides. A single narrow road zigzagged up the southern approach. The castle's cisterns held enough water for months. Its storerooms could feed a garrison through the longest siege. From its towers, defenders could see Ottoman armies approaching from 20 miles away. The Sultan had made a fatal miscalculation. Inside, Kruja waited 1,000 Ottoman soldiers, Turks, not Albanians. They maintained the empire's grip on central Albania. Their commander, a veteran named Hasan Bey, had served here 5 years without incident. He knew Skanderbeg by reputation, the brilliant Albanian commander who'd crushed revolts from Syria to Serbia. When guards announced Skanderbeg's arrival, Hasan Bey ordered the gates opened immediately. But hidden in those mountains was something deadlier than armies. It was Albanian memory. In the valleys below Kruja, villagers still told stories of free Albania. Shepherds in mountain passes remembered when their ancestors chose their own leaders. The Ottoman system could convert bodies and minds, but it couldn't reach into the deepest wells of cultural identity. Skanderbeg understood this. His 300 men weren't just cavalry, they were Albanians returning home. As Skanderbeg's column climbed the winding road to Kruja, he reviewed his mental map of the fortress. Ottoman service had brought him here before. He knew the guard rotations, the barracks locations, the commander's quarters. Most crucially, he knew Ottoman military culture. Strict hierarchy meant subordinates rarely questioned written orders. Here's the detail that changes everything. The forged letter was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. It didn't just order, command, transfer. It included personal details only the Sultan would know, referenced recent battles correctly, and used perfect Ottoman administrative language. Skanderbeg had spent years studying such documents. The seal, pressed into red wax, was indistinguishable from the real thing. At the fortress gates, Skanderbeg presented the letter with practiced confidence. Hasan Bey examined it carefully. Everything appeared correct. The seal was genuine. The language was precise. And here stood Skanderbeg himself, one of the empire's most trusted commanders, with 300 Ottoman cavalry. What reason was there to doubt? What followed defied every rule of medieval warfare. Hasan Bey ordered his garrison assembled in the courtyard to witness the formal transfer of command. Ottoman military tradition demanded ceremony. The soldiers formed ranks: 500 janissaries, 300 regular infantry, 200 support staff. They removed their helmets in respect for their new commander. Skanderbeg's 300 Albanians mingled casually among them, hands resting on sword hilts. This single decision would cost 20,000 lives, because Skanderbeg had no intention of commanding Ottomans. As night fell, and the formal ceremony concluded, he gave a prearranged signal. His 300 men drew their swords simultaneously. The garrison, unprepared and unarmored, had no chance. What followed wasn't a battle, but an execution. But Skanderbeg had learned something in Ottoman service. Mercy was weakness. The Ottomans had taught him that rebellions must be crushed completely. No survivors meant no warnings sent. No witnesses meant no immediate retaliation. In the darkness of Kruja fortress, Skanderbeg applied Ottoman lessons against Ottoman soldiers. The next 48 hours would shake Constantinople. As dawn broke over Kruja, Albanian villagers saw something they hadn't witnessed in decades. The red and black eagle banner of the Castrioti family flying from the fortress towers. The crescent had fallen. Church bells that had been silent for years began to ring. Word spread through the mountains like wildfire. Skanderbeg had returned, and Albania was in revolt. On a cold November night, 20 years of loyalty ended in blood. The massacre at Kruja was swift and absolute. Skanderbeg's men moved through the barracks with practiced efficiency. Ottoman soldiers, caught without weapons or armor, died in their beds or against barrack walls. Hassan Bey realized the deception too late. Skanderbeg personally ensured he never reported it. By midnight, 1,000 Ottoman soldiers lay dead. This is when physics met psychology. Skanderbeg understood that news travels slowly but legend flies. He ordered the bodies displayed on the fortress walls, not from cruelty, but from calculation. Every Albanian who passed would see Ottoman invincibility broken. Every merchant would carry the story. The psychological impact would ripple across the Balkans before Ottoman administrators even knew Kruja had fallen. As dawn broke on November 29, Skanderbeg assembled the Albanian population from surrounding villages. Standing on the fortress walls, still in Ottoman armor stained with Ottoman blood, he made a declaration that would echo for 5 centuries. He renounced Islam publicly, proclaimed himself a Christian prince again, and called for Albanian liberation. What the Ottomans discovered was worse than defeat. It was betrayal from within their own system. The Devshirme program had created its own destroyer. Every tactic Skanderbeg would use against them, they had taught him. Every weakness he would exploit, he had learned in their service. The Ottoman military machine had forged the weapon of its own humiliation. But the Albanian mountains held a terrible secret. The terrain itself was unconquerable by conventional armies. Skanderbeg had spent 20 years studying Ottoman military doctrine designed for open steppes and siege warfare. In Albania's maze of valleys, gorges, and peaks, that doctrine became a death trap. Ottoman heavy cavalry, invincible on plains, couldn't maneuver on mountain paths. Supply trains stretched for miles became easy targets for ambush. Here's where military genius becomes almost supernatural. Within days of taking Kruja, Skanderbeg transformed from Ottoman commander to Albanian warlord. He sent riders to every Albanian noble, every mountain clan, every Christian holdout. His message was simple: join me now, or face the Ottomans alone forever. The forged letter had given him a fortress. Now he needed an army. The response overwhelmed expectations. Albanian nobles who'd feuded for generations united under Skanderbeg's banner. Mountain clans that had never acknowledged any lord pledged their fighters. Even Albanian soldiers in Ottoman service began deserting. Within 3 months, Skanderbeg commanded 10,000 men. The Sultan's response shocked even his generals. When news of Kruja finally reached Murad II, his rage was volcanic, not just for the lost fortress or dead soldiers, but for the personal betrayal. Skanderbeg had been like a son in the Ottoman system. His defection suggested the entire Devshirme program might be flawed. Murad ordered immediate retaliation, not just military conquest, but complete annihilation of Albanian resistance. This moment would echo for 5 centuries. In March 1444, the League of Leger formed Albanian nobles, swearing a sacred oath to fight together under Skanderbeg's command. For the first time in history, Albanians united as one people against a common enemy. The hostage had become a king, the servant had become a symbol. The first Ottoman response came in June 1444. Ali Pasha led 25,000 men to crush the rebellion before it spread. He expected to face scattered clan fighters. Instead, at the Battle of Torvioll, he met something the Ottomans had never encountered. Their own tactics turned against them by someone who understood them perfectly. But mathematics couldn't explain what happened next. Skanderbeg positioned his 10,000 men in forested hills above the Torvioll plain. He knew Ali Pasha's weakness. Ottoman commanders' hunger for glory made them predictable. Skanderbeg sent 3,000 light cavalry onto the plain as bait, instructing them to flee at first contact. Ali Pasha, seeing cowardly Albanians running, ordered pursuit. The survivors would never speak of what they saw. As Ottoman cavalry charged after fleeing Albanians, they stretched into a long column. At Skanderbeg's signal, the fleeing cavalry wheeled around. Hidden Albanian forces erupted from forests on both flanks. The Ottoman column, trapped and surrounded, collapsed into chaos. Skanderbeg personally led the final charge that shattered Turkish resistance. This is where legend separates from history. Contemporary accounts claim 22,000 Ottoman dead against 120 Albanian losses. While probably exaggerated, the victory's psychological impact was real. The invincible Ottoman army had been crushed by Albanian rebels. Skanderbeg sent captured banners to European courts as proof that the Ottomans could be beaten. What happened in that valley defied logic. But it followed the logic Skanderbeg had learned in Ottoman service. He knew their command structure, their battle rhythms, their psychological weaknesses. Every Ottoman strength became a vulnerability when the enemy knew it intimately. The empire's greatest student had become its greatest teacher in the art of Ottoman destruction. But killing a garrison was one thing, facing the Sultan's vengeance would be another. Sultan Murad II's response to Torvioll was to mobilize the largest army ever sent against Albania. In May 1450, 100,000 Ottoman soldiers marched from Adrianople. The force included the Sultan's elite Janissary Corps, Serbian auxiliary cavalry, siege engineers with the latest cannons, and enough supplies to maintain a year-long campaign. Murad commanded personally. This wasn't about strategy anymore, but about imperial rage. But Murad had walked into a 500-year-old trap. The Albanian mountains had defeated invaders since Roman times. Skanderbeg knew every pass, every valley, every water source. More importantly, he understood the mathematics of massive armies. 100,000 men required 300 tons of food daily, 50,000 gallons of water, miles of camping space. In Albania's confined terrain, these needs became fatal weaknesses. As the Ottoman host entered Albania, Skanderbeg ordered total evacuation. Villagers fled to mountain strongholds with their livestock and grain. Wells were poisoned, mills destroyed, bridges burned. The Ottoman army found only empty villages and barren fields. Skanderbeg had learned from the Mongols through Ottoman histories, let the land itself fight your battles. The cost of pride was about to be paid in blood. On May 14th, 1450, Murad's army reached Kruja. The Sultan expected to find a terrified garrison ready to surrender. Instead, he found 1,500 of Skanderbeg's best men under Count Vrana Conti, walls reinforced with Ottoman engineering knowledge, and stockpiles for a 2-year siege. Worse, Skanderbeg himself was nowhere in the fortress. He watched from the mountains with 8,000 mobile fighters. This single hour would haunt Ottoman military doctrine. Murad ordered immediate assault. His Janissaries, the finest infantry in the world, advanced with scaling ladders. Albanian defenders waited until they were committed to the climb, then poured boiling olive oil and pushed the ladders back. The narrow approach to Kruja meant only a few hundred Ottomans could attack at once. Elite troops died uselessly against determined defenders who knew every inch of their walls. But death was just the beginning of Skanderbeg's victory. While Murad fixated on Kruja, Skanderbeg's forces ranged freely through Ottoman supply lines. Every night brought new disasters, burned supply wagons, poisoned water sources, murdered sentries. Ottoman foraging parties that ventured into valleys never returned. The 100,000-man army began eating itself. Here's where Skanderbeg's Ottoman training became a weapon. He knew Ottoman camp routines, guard schedules, and command signals. Albanian raiders struck precisely when guards changed shifts. They used Ottoman passwords, learned from deserters. One night, dressed in Janissary uniforms, a raiding party penetrated to the Sultan's tent before being discovered. Murad escaped, but the psychological damage was done. Nowhere was safe. The pattern was genius in its simplicity. By day, Ottoman cannons pounded Kruja's walls while defenders repaired damage each night. By night, Albanian raiders turned the Ottoman camp into a battlefield. Sleep-deprived, hungry, and paranoid, the mighty Ottoman army slowly degraded. This is where Ottoman confidence became Ottoman catastrophe. June became July. The siege dragged on. Kruja's walls, built on solid rock, resisted cannon fire. Count Vrana Conti sent mocking messages to Murad, thanking him for the cannonballs they melted down for weapons. Disease spread through Ottoman camps. Dysentery killed more than Albanian swords. Then came the moment that would shatter Ottoman invincibility. On July 20th, Skanderbeg executed his masterstroke. He spread rumors through deserters that a massive relief army was approaching. Then he coordinated the illusion. Thousands of campfires appeared on surrounding ridges. War horns echoed from every direction. Dust clouds suggested moving armies. The Ottoman army, already demoralized, believed they were about to be surrounded. That night, Skanderbeg attacked with his full force of 8,000, but instead of a frontal assault, he struck the Ottoman supply depot and horse lines. Starving soldiers watched their food burn. Cavalry found their mounts hamstrung. Panic spread faster than fire. In darkness and chaos, Ottomans fought Ottomans, each group believing the other was Albanian infiltrators. What Murad discovered at dawn changed everything. His losses were catastrophic. 8,000 dead in one night, supplies destroyed, army morale shattered. After 4.5 months, Kruja still stood defiant. With winter approaching and his army dissolving, the Sultan, who'd never lost a siege, ordered retreat. As the Ottoman columns filed away, Albanian forces harassed them constantly. Of 100,000 who entered Albania, fewer than 70,000 limped home, but the Albanian mountains had been waiting centuries for this moment. 7 years passed. The Ottomans licked their wounds while Skanderbeg consolidated Albanian unity. Then in 1457, they tried again, this time at Albania, where Skanderbeg achieved his masterpiece of deception. Facing 80,000 Ottomans with just 10,000 men, he used controlled retreat to lure them into a valley where he'd diverted a river. When Ottomans packed into the killing ground, Skanderbeg's engineers broke the dams. The resulting flood and mud turned Ottoman numbers into a death trap. Albanians on the valley ridges shot down at helpless enemies. Contemporary accounts claim 30,000 Ottoman casualties in a single day. Here's where military genius transcended into legend. Mehmed II, conqueror of Constantinople, took the Ottoman throne determined to succeed where his father failed. In 1466, he personally led 150,000 men against Albania. He besieged Kruja with the cannons that had broken Constantinople's legendary walls. But Skanderbeg had learned too. The fortress had been reinforced with angled walls that deflected cannonballs. Underground tunnels let defenders strike behind Ottoman lines. The Sultan had numbers. Skanderbeg had gravity. Every Ottoman assault uphill cost 10 men to kill one defender. Albanian archers, firing downward, achieved twice the range of Ottomans shooting up. Rocks rolled down, mountain slopes crushed through Ottoman formations. Even weather favored defenders' mountain storms that barely dampened the fortress flooded Ottoman camps below. What happened next would haunt Ottoman military doctrine for generations. Mehmed, the empire's greatest conqueror, spent 4 months achieving nothing but casualties. His grand army dwindled through disease, desertion, and constant Albanian raids. The man who'd taken Constantinople in 53 days couldn't take a single Albanian fortress in 120. When he finally retreated, Skanderbeg had achieved the impossible. He'd broken the myth of Ottoman invincibility not once, but repeatedly. But revenge is a dish best served at 8,000 feet. During the final siege of Mehmed's campaign, Skanderbeg executed his most audacious raid. While the Sultan focused on Kruja, Albanian forces swept through Ottoman-controlled lowlands, reaching the Adriatic coast. They burned Ottoman ports, freed Christian slaves, and returned to the mountains before pursuit could organize. The message was clear. While you besiege one fortress, we range freely through your territory. This is the moment when betrayal became destiny. 25 years after that first forged letter, Skanderbeg had transformed from Ottoman commander to the empire's nightmare. His knowledge of their system, combined with Albanian terrain and warrior culture, created an unbeatable combination. 2 sultans had failed. Hundreds of thousands of Ottoman soldiers had marched into Albania. Far fewer marched out. In the space of one heartbeat, an empire's fate shifted. The Ottoman expansion into Europe, seemingly unstoppable, had found its limit in Albanian mountains, not through superior numbers or technology, but through the genius of one man who knew their every weakness. Skanderbeg proved that empires could be defied, that David could beat Goliath, if David had trained in Goliath's army. Now, 100,000 Ottoman warriors marched to make him pay. But after 25 years of humiliation, the empire finally found its opening. January 17th, 1468. Skanderbeg lay dying of malaria in Lizar, surrounded by his captains. For 25 years, he had been Albania's shield. His tactical genius, intimate knowledge of Ottoman warfare, and sheer force of will had kept the empire at bay, but no man could defeat time. As fever consumed the 63-year-old warrior, his followers faced a terrible truth. Albania's resistance had been built around one irreplaceable leader. What happened next would shake Constantinople. News of Skanderbeg's death reached Sultan Mehmed within days. The conqueror who'd failed 3 times against living Skanderbeg immediately ordered a new invasion. But even in death, the Albanian commander had prepared one final humiliation. He'd trained his captains well, fortified every stronghold, and most importantly, transformed Albanian identity. The Ottomans would discover that killing the man didn't kill the resistance. The Sultan brought 200,000 men in 1478, the largest army ever sent against Albania. But it took them 10 full years after Skanderbeg's death to finally capture Kruja. The fortress that had defied sultans for decades finally fell through treachery, not assault. Even then, its defenders fought room by room, stair by stair. The last Albanian warriors barricaded themselves in the tower and fought until their swords broke. This is where physics met psychology. The numbers tell the story. Over 25 years of war, the Ottomans lost an estimated 150,000 soldiers in Albania. They committed armies that could have conquered kingdoms, resources that could have taken Vienna or Rome. Instead, they bled themselves white against Albanian mountains for a territory smaller than Belgium, but hidden in those peaks was something deadlier than armies. It was the idea Skanderbeg had planted, that the Ottoman Empire could be resisted, that David could humiliate Goliath repeatedly. Every failed siege became a story. Every Ottoman retreat inspired resistance elsewhere. European powers, who'd viewed Ottoman expansion as unstoppable, began to reconsider. If 10,000 Albanians could hold off 100,000 Ottomans, what might united Christian armies achieve? The survivors would never speak of what they saw, because the Albanian war violated everything Ottomans believed about conquest. They were used to enemies who broke after one major defeat. Instead, they faced an enemy who grew stronger with each battle, who turned their own tactics against them, who made victory more costly than defeat. Ottoman soldiers who survived Albanian campaigns often refused to return. Here's the detail that changes everything. When Kruja finally fell in 1478, the Ottomans found Skanderbeg's personal chambers untouched, maintained as a shrine by the defenders. Inside lay his sword, helmet, and a letter he'd written before death. It predicted the fortress would fall after he died, but promised his spirit would haunt every Ottoman who entered Albania. Mehmed ordered the room sealed, some say from respect, others from fear. This single decision would cost 20,000 lives. The Ottoman victory proved Pyrrhic. To hold Albania after conquering it required permanent garrisons in every valley. Albanian guerrillas, trained in Skanderbeg's methods, made occupation a nightmare. Ottoman tax collectors needed armed escorts. Ottoman administrators lived in fortified compounds. The empire spent more controlling Albania than it ever extracted. But Skanderbeg had learned something in Ottoman service. That empires fear ideas more than armies. His 25-year war created the Albanian national consciousness. Clans that had feuded for centuries now shared a common story of resistance. The red and black eagle became more than a banner. It became an identity that would survive 400 years of occupation. What followed defied every rule of medieval warfare. Even with Skanderbeg dead and Kruja fallen, Albanian resistance continued for decades. His captains established mountain strongholds that took years to reduce. His son, trained in Venetian territory, led raids until Ottoman pressure forced European powers to abandon him. The conquest that should have taken one campaign required a generation. The next 48 hours would shake Constantinople. When final victory reports reached Mehmed in 1479, the Sultan who'd conquered Constantinople, crushed Serbia, and terrorized Europe, reportedly said, "At last, Albania is ours. It only cost us 2 sultans' reputations, 25 years, and more dead than Constantinople and Belgrade combined." Skanderbeg in death achieved what he couldn't in life. He made victory feel like defeat. What happened in that valley defied logic. The Ottomans had won, but at what cost? They controlled Albanian territory, but not Albanian hearts. They'd proven their military might, but exposed their vulnerability. Most damaging of all, they'd created a legend that would inspire resistance for centuries. Every Balkan rebellion would invoke Skanderbeg's name. Every guerrilla war would study his tactics. This is the moment when betrayal became destiny. Because Skanderbeg's betrayal transcended personal revenge, he'd exposed the fatal flaw in Ottoman expansion, that empires built on force alone create their own destroyers. The Dev Sherm system that turned Christian boys into janissaries had created its own nemesis. The military knowledge meant to crush resistance became the blueprint for resistance. In the space of one heartbeat, an empire's fate shifted. The Ottoman Empire would continue expanding for 2 more centuries, but never with the same confidence. Every mountain range might hide another Skanderbeg. Every conquered people might produce another insider-turned-enemy. The psychological wound never healed. Albanian mountains had broken something beyond armies. They'd broken Ottoman certainty. The Ottomans had won, but they'd also lost something far greater. 5 centuries later, Skanderbeg's revolution echoes through history. Military academies study his campaigns as masterclasses in asymmetric warfare. His tactics, mobility over mass, terrain as weapon, psychological operations, targeted logistics, disruption read like modern guerrilla doctrine. The Vietnamese studied his methods against Americans. Afghan Mujahideen invoked his name against Soviets, but death was just the beginning of Skanderbeg's victory. His true triumph wasn't military but psychological. He proved empires aren't invincible, that knowledge of the oppressor's system becomes the oppressed's greatest weapon. Every intelligence officer turned against their handlers follows Skanderbeg's playbook. Every insider who exposes corruption walks his path. European perception shifted fundamentally. Before Skanderbeg, Ottoman expansion seemed divinely ordained, unstoppable. After him, Europeans knew the empire could bleed. His diplomatic correspondence filled European courts with tactical intelligence about Ottoman weaknesses. The Pope named him Defender of the Faith. Venice, Naples, and Hungary studied his methods. Here's where military genius becomes almost supernatural. Because Skanderbeg achieved something mathematics can't explain. Outnumbered 10-1 regularly, facing the world's most powerful military machine, using medieval technology against early gunpowder weapons, he didn't just survive, he triumphed repeatedly. His 25-year resistance remains history's longest successful defense against overwhelming odds. The Albanian identity forged in those years survived 400 years of occupation. When Albania finally gained independence in 1912, Skanderbeg's eagle banner flew again. His tactics inspired 20th-century Albanian partisans against fascists and Nazis. Even under communist isolation, his image remained sacred, the one historical hero every faction claimed. This moment would echo for 5 centuries. Modern military theorists recognize Skanderbeg as history's first hybrid warfare practitioner. He combined conventional battles, guerrilla raids, psychological operations, diplomatic maneuvering, and economic warfare into seamless strategy. His intelligence network rivaled modern services. His propaganda methods presaged information warfare. But the Albanian mountains held a terrible secret. They'd proven that empire's greatest strength, systematic control, becomes fatal weakness when the system is understood by enemies. Every empire since has faced its own Skanderbegs, insiders who turn knowledge into resistance. The British in India, French in Algeria, Americans in Vietnam, all bled against enemies who knew their playbooks. What the Ottomans discovered was worse than defeat. They'd discovered the limits of power itself. All their advantages, numbers, technology, resources, organization, meant nothing against perfect knowledge of their weaknesses combined with unbreakable will. Skanderbeg proved that in certain conditions, David doesn't need luck to beat Goliath, just his training manual. The cost of pride was about to be paid in blood. Not just Ottoman blood spilled in Albanian valleys, but the blood of every empire that believed force alone ensures victory. Skanderbeg's lesson reverberates. Train your enemies at your own risk. Occupy hostile terrain at your peril. Underestimate human will at your doom. 100,000 men couldn't defeat 5,000, but they created something immortal, a legend that proves empires can be defied, that knowledge is deadlier than swords, that a single betrayal can echo across centuries. In trying to crush Albanian resistance, the Ottomans had created an eternal symbol of resistance itself. The Ottoman Empire won Albania, but lost its aura of invincibility. In those mountains, mathematical probability met human impossibility, and impossibility won. That's the eternal lesson of Skanderbeg. When freedom meets oppression in perfect conditions, when knowledge serves justice instead of power, when one man's betrayal becomes a nation's salvation, even empires must kneel.